In the cradle of artificial light and the dull hum of life support systems, Viara Tan awoke to a world she no longer recognized. Her eyes fluttered open not with clarity but with confusion, a slow, stuttering return to consciousness that felt more like a rebirth than a revival. The air smelled faintly of antiseptic and recycled oxygen, tinged with the cold sterility that only medical bays carried, not just places of healing, but of reckoning. Her breath caught in her throat before it even escaped. Muscles clenched. Limbs trembled. There was a fever inside her, not the kind that broke with sweat or stilled under cooling cloths, but one that seemed woven into her very marrow. Every beat of her heart felt amplified, like thunder trapped within fragile bone. Her skin, blue-tinged and lined with faint bioluminescence, shimmered with perspiration as though her body had been caught in a storm from which her mind had only just returned. The last thing she remembered was joy, the sound of laughter echoing off metallic walls, the heat of camaraderie shared over a bottle of human liquor, her crew's celebration echoing the primal rituals of her ancestors, who once danced around crystalline fires on the homeworld of Aurelia. The faces had blurred, friends, allies, warriors, but the feeling had been real. For once, there had been no hierarchy, no tension, only unity. She had allowed herself to be vulnerable, to feel. But now she was unraveling. She tried to sit up, but the universe tilted. Dizziness washed over her like a tide, pulling her beneath the surface. And through the ringing in her ears and the pulse pounding in her skull, she heard his voice. "Easy, Lieutenant Tan," said Dr. Seamers. His tone was steady, practiced. But she sensed it immediately, the undercurrent of worry, the fracture beneath his professionalism. "What happened?" she rasped, her throat like sand, voice barely recognizable as her own. Her third eye, the iridescent oculus in the center of her brow, flickered weakly open, its usually serene glow now erratic and strained. It sought his aura instinctively, a relic of her species' empathic lineage, and what it found made her stomach turn, red, violent, chaotic concern. "You had a reaction," he said, avoiding her gaze. "The whiskey, your system, it didn't handle it well." A lie, or at the very least, a half-truth. She narrowed her eyes, forcing her vision to stabilize. "There's something you're not saying. Tell me." Seamers sighed, that long, weary exhalation of a man who'd fought every ethical battle medicine could offer and had now found himself on unfamiliar ground. "It's not just the alcohol," he admitted, folding his arms like a shield. "It interacted with the military-grade serum, the performance enhancement compound, the one we all carry in our systems. You know it. Issued on enlistment, boosts neural transmission, muscular reflexes, adrenaline processing. For humans, it's safe, well-tested. But you, Viara, you're not human." That truth wasn't a wound. It was a badge she wore every day. The Orlan officer on a mostly human ship. The outlier. The proof of interspecies cooperation. The exception to the rule. But exceptions, she now realized, paid their price. "What did it do?" she asked, her voice like steel forged in desperation. He hesitated again. And when he finally spoke, it was not as a doctor, but as a man delivering a sentence. "It triggered a mating response," Seamers said. "But not a normal one. An extreme one. Every hormone in your body is elevated beyond measurable thresholds. Pheromone output, neurological arousal centers all in overdrive. Viara, you're in heat." Aggressively, she stared at him, but did not speak. The silence that followed was not emptiness, it was weight. A silence of oceans pressing against the hull of a fragile ship. The concept wasn't foreign. Her people, like many mammalian species, experienced cycles of reproductive readiness. But they were mild, private, sacred. This was a perversion. An alchemical storm brewed between alien blood and artificial serum. "Are you saying I'm dying of desire?" she finally asked, the corners of her mouth twitching with the bitter ghost of a laugh. "If it isn't controlled," Seamers replied, "your body will begin to shut down. Shock, organ failure. You'll burn from the inside out." Viara looked past him, eyes unfocused. She saw the lights above, the humming vitals on the monitor beside her, the shimmer of condensation on the wall panel. But mostly, she saw failure, the terrifying, inescapable shame of it. And the solution? Another pause, shorter this time, but heavier. "There's a sedative," he said. "It might dull the edges, but it won't stop it. It won't cure it." She didn't need him to say the rest. "The only true solution," he continued, "is physical resolution." sexual, preferably with a willing partner who can match your biology. Stimulate, release. Over time, it should bring your body back down from its hyperstate. Viara closed her eyes, not to rest, but to shut out the universe, to run from the implications. She had trained for battle, endured psychological resilience simulations, survived null-gravity survival trials. But this reduced her to an animal, helpless before an impulse. To ask for help in this way would be to undress her soul before her comrades. To choose someone, or worse, be seen choosing. Seamers gently placed a hand on her shoulder. You're not alone, Viara. You're sick. This isn't your fault. But it felt like fault. It felt like a punishment for pride. She opened her eyes. Give me time. I need to think. He nodded. Of course, I'll give you privacy. If it worsens, press the call panel. And Viara, he hesitated. Whatever you decide, we'll face it together. He left, and the door, when it closed behind him, sounded like judgment. She curled into herself, not out of pain, but out of fear. Not of death, but of humiliation, of being seen, of losing control in a world where control was her only armor. And deep inside her, the fire grew. She sat alone, cloaked in silence, as the walls around her seemed to hum with knowledge of her shame. The medbay was empty now, its bright lights still buzzing above like celestial witnesses, merciless in their clarity. No shadows to hide in, no dark corners to veil her trembling form. Everything here was sterilized, exposed much like her condition. Viara Tan, daughter of House Taken, veteran of 3 planetary conflicts, decorated officer of the Joint Galactic Fleet, curled into herself like a wounded animal, burning with a need that was not hers, and yet now defined her. She thought of Aurelia, her homeworld of crystalline cliffs and amber skies, of temples carved into obsidian spires where her people meditated to quiet the fire of the third eye. Her mother used to say, "The mind is sovereign, Viara. The body is the servant. Let it act only when summoned." It had been her mantra, her armor, her shield, and yet, here she was, betrayed by the servant, forsaken by the sovereign. Her breathing had become shallow. Every exhale was a whisper of surrender, every inhale a fresh wave of craving. Her skin ached, not with illness, but anticipation. Her thighs trembled, jaw clenched. She pressed her forehead against the edge of the bed and whispered prayers in her native tongue, half memory, half desperation. But no gods answered. No sacred voice reached across the void to ease her torment. Only her own heartbeat, louder now, faster, like the war drums of her ancestors, calling her not to battle, but to submission. She could not stay here. The medbay too open, too close to others. Anyone could walk in, see her like this. The Orlan ambassador reduced to a thing of hunger. She could not bear their eyes, their pity. With a groan that was half sob, half growl, Viara forced herself upright. The simple motion triggered a cascade of sensation, her body reacting with want, with flame, with pulses that had no mercy. She staggered to her feet, legs barely responding. Her medical gown clung to her sweat-slicked skin like a shroud too small to contain her form. She peeked into the corridor, empty. The quiet of ship night had settled, most personnel asleep or in downtime cycles. It was her only chance. She moved quickly, though each step threatened to break her. Every vibration of the deck beneath her bare feet echoed up through her spine like touch. Every stray breeze across her skin felt like breath against her neck. She slipped through shadows, keeping to walls and service routes. Her quarters were not far, but the journey felt endless, as if the ship itself watched her, curious, whispering, "Is this the mighty Viara? Is this what becomes of control?" She made it barely, palmed open the door, slid inside, sealed it behind her. Only then did she collapse. Her room was sparse, Spartan even by Orlan standards. A meditation mat, a bed with crisp white sheets, a holoscreen paused mid-scroll on a poetic essay about temporal perception in wormhole dwelling species. It had once fascinated her. Now it seemed absurd. How could one ponder time when the present was this unbearable? She stripped off the gown with trembling hands, peeled away the damp underclothes, and threw them aside like they had betrayed her. The sheets welcomed her, cool and soft, but they were not enough. Nothing was enough. She writhed not from pleasure, but from the gaping absence of it. Her body sought relief in rhythm, in friction, in touch. She gave in, let hands wander over fevered skin, tracing the curves of muscle and bone like a cartographer mapping desperation. Fingers circled breasts, hips rocked, thighs clenched, but it was no use. This was not a hunger that could be sated alone. Her biology screamed not for stimulation, but for communion, for connection, the kind her people performed only in sacred rites, surrounded by song and ceremonial silk, now reduced to panting and silence, beneath a flickering ceiling panel. A sound broke the moment, not from within, but from outside. The door chime, soft, hesitant, then again louder. She froze. No, she mouthed silently. Not now, not like this. But the voice that followed shattered her resolve. Viara. It's Jim. Captain James Matt, her commanding officer, her ally, her friend, the one human she had tried not to dream of, the one she had failed not to want. I spoke to Seamers. He told me, something happened. I just wanted to check in. Are you okay? His voice, smooth, steady, like the gravity of a familiar star, pulling her toward its warmth. She clutched the sheet to her chest, trying to still the tremor in her hands, trying to bury the ache that bloomed at the sound of his concern. She should send him away, should lie, should say she was fine, resting, sleeping, anything but letting him see her like this undone. But she didn't, because deep in the coals of her shame, a spark remained, a desire older than her culture, older than duty, a secret she had buried beneath layers of logic and professionalism. She wanted him, always had, and now, she needed him. She rose, slow, barefoot and burning, wrapped herself in a thin robe, walked toward the door like a woman stepping toward destiny, and as her hand hovered over the panel, she whispered one last protest to the gods of restraint. Then she opened it. The door hissed open with a sound that echoed far louder in Viara's mind than it did in the corridor. And there he stood, Captain James Matt, framed in the doorway like a question the universe had been waiting for her to answer. He looked tired, not in the way of missleep, but the fatigue of burden, of command, of watching his crew dance close to danger time and again. His dark eyes were full of concern, and something else, something unspoken. His hair was tousled from rest, or perhaps from worry, and his uniform hastily thrown on only made his presence more vulnerable. Less captain, more man. His eyes swept over her, not with judgment, but with the startled realization that the woman before him was not the composed, armored officer he'd known. She was flushed, disheveled, breathing in uneven waves, and though her robe shielded her form, the signs were unmistakable. The gleam of sweat on blue-tinged skin, the tension vibrating through every muscle, the widened pupils of someone on the edge. Viara. He said softly, the syllables a question, an anchor, a prayer. She didn't answer with words, didn't trust herself to. Instead, her hand shot out, gripping the front of his shirt. She pulled him inside like a lifeline. The door slid shut behind him, with a whisper of finality, not just a seal of privacy, but a surrender to the moment. Jim stumbled slightly, catching his balance with instinct born of years in zero-grav environments. His expression flickered between confusion, realization, and then something darker, something deeper. What are you doing? He asked, voice low but not angry. What I need, she breathed, stepping into his space, the fire in her blood, now a roaring inferno. He stood motionless as her hands pressed flat against his chest, her eyes, all three of them, locked onto his, the central oculus glowing faintly now, not with chaos, but with clarity. She was no longer confused. She had made a choice. I won't lie, she said, voice trembling with the effort to sound composed. The serum did this, the reaction, the need, but what I'm about to do, that's me. Jim's lips parted, breath catching. I want you, Jim, she whispered, and not because my blood burns, not just because this ache demands it, but because I've always wanted you. Before the fire, before the failure, in the quiet hours when the ship drifted in silence, and I let myself feel, I thought of you. It hung between them like a fragile bridge. Vulnerability stretched thin. She could see him weighing the moment, see the tension in his jaw, the storm behind his eyes, duty warring with desire, honor grappling with hunger. And then, slowly, he reached out. His hand found the side of her face, callous palm, fingers gentle, and he touched her like she might shatter beneath him. I've thought about you too, he confessed, voice rough with restraint. Too many times. That was all she needed. She surged forward, mouth capturing his in a kiss that was less invitation and more claim. He met her with equal force, hands pulling her closer, pressing her body against the solid warmth of his. It was not soft, not hesitant. It was the kind of kiss that shed years of pretense in a single breath. Her robe slipped from her shoulders as his hands roamed, and in turn, she tugged at his uniform, fingers finding fastenings through muscle memory. No time for ceremony. Only skin against skin, the meeting of star-forged wills, two beings caught in a singular orbit at last. He walked them backward, lips never leaving hers, until her knees hit the edge of the bed. She fell onto the sheets, pulling him with her, the weight of his body a balm to her burning core. He paused for the briefest moment, gazing down at her. Are you sure? She met his eyes without hesitation. I've never been more certain of anything. And so, he gave himself to her not as captain, not as savior, but as a man lost in a woman's gravity. And she received him, not as patient or victim, but as a soul starved for something deeper than mere touch. Their joining was not frantic, but fierce, every motion deliberate, every breath a syncopated rhythm of longing. His hands explored the ridges of her body, tracing the lines of alien flesh with reverence. Her fingers clutched at him, anchoring herself in a moment that felt like it might vanish if she blinked. Her body arched beneath his, the fire that had once tormented her now redirected no longer chaos, but crescendo. When release came, it tore through her like starlight, luminous, overwhelming, transcendent, and then silence, the kind of silence that only follows profound truths. They lay together, limbs tangled, sweat cooling, breath mingling. She rested her head against his chest, listening to the rhythm of his heart, not steady, not perfect, but real. She had not been healed, she had not been cured, but in that moment, she had found peace, however temporary, and that, she knew, was enough. For now, she did not remember falling asleep, only that when she opened her eyes again, the artificial starlight filtering through the cabin's viewport painted soft silver patterns on Jim's bare shoulder. His arm lay across her waist, heavy with sleep, and his breath rose and fell in quiet waves against the back of her neck. For a few heartbeats, Viara let herself be still. No alarms, no orders, just skin pressed to skin and the echo of fire receding in her bones. But even in silence, her mind would not rest. She turned slowly, careful not to disturb him, and studied the lines of his face. He looked younger when he slept, the furrow in his brow gone, the weight of command briefly shed. This was not the man who bore the rank of captain. This was the man who had whispered her name like it was sacred, who had held her when she was unraveling, who had touched her like she was something to be remembered, not pitied. And yet, the fire still lived inside her, quieter now, yes, tempered, but not extinguished. Her body still hummed with the serum's influence. A vibration beneath the skin, a hunger crouching just below satisfaction. It had given her no reprieve, only a momentary illusion of relief. She slid out from under the blanket with quiet precision, drawing a thin robe over her shoulders as she rose. Her legs still trembled, the ache between her thighs still present a reminder that one joining, however profound, had not undone the storm. She moved to the sink and splashed cold water on her face. It felt like ice, a shock that cleared her head but not her condition. Her reflection stared back at her, hair wild, third eye dimmed but not dormant, skin flushed with heat. She looked like a woman haunted by her own biology. Viara cursed softly under her breath, in her native tongue, not at Jim, not at Seamers, not even at the serum, but at herself, for thinking that giving in once would be enough, for hoping biology could be reasoned with. Behind her, Jim stirred. She turned, watched him wake slowly, his eyes finding her with the soft affection of someone who still carried her weight in his bones. You're up early, he murmured, voice thick with sleep. I never really slept, she said, and then, quieter, not truly, he sat up, the blanket falling to his waist, revealing the sculpted chest of a soldier who had fought wars and won hearts. Are you all right? The question was genuine, but it held layers. He wasn't just asking about her condition. He was asking what she was thinking, what she was feeling, whether she regretted the night they had just shared. I'm better than I was, she replied honestly. But the serum, it's not done with me. Jim's jaw tensed. Then we go back to Seamers. We find another solution. She shook her head slowly. We found a solution, just not a lasting one. His brows pulled together. You're saying this will keep happening? That you'll yes. Her voice was calm now, but resolute. The fire will return, again and again, until it either consumes me, or we find a way to stop it. He looked away, and for the first time, She saw fear in his eyes. Not fear of her, but fear for her. And perhaps, just perhaps, fear of what this would do to both of them, what it would ask of him. Again and again, he opened his mouth to speak. But before he could form words, a chime rang through the quiet, urgent, sharp, from the ship's comes. Medical bay to Lieutenant Tan. Urgent summons requested. Immediate presence required. Viara's pulse spiked. She was already moving. Jim threw off the blanket, grabbing his uniform. I'm coming with you. She didn't stop him. The medbay was bathed in blue light, diagnostics flickering across every screen. Dr. Seamers stood over a bank of monitors, eyes wide behind his lenses. He turned as they entered, and Viara knew instantly something had changed. I was just about to call you again, he said breathlessly. You need to hear this. Viara approached. What is it? The serum, he said, tapping a screen. It's mutating. Her breath caught. Seamers continued. I've been tracking its behavior in your bloodstream. What I saw this morning. It's not just sustaining your condition. It's evolving, adapting to your cellular structure, bonding with your DNA in a way I've never seen. What does that mean? Jim asked, stepping closer. Seamers looked at Viara, and his next words landed like a falling asteroid. It means you may not be the only one affected anymore. Silence. Then, Viara's voice low, measured, but laced with dread. You're saying it's contagious. Seamers nodded slowly. Anyone you've been in close proximity with since the reaction began may now carry it. Her heart stuttered. She looked at Jim and saw the realization dawn on his face. He staggered back a half step, hands clenched into fists. I thought I was just exhausted, but this morning I felt it. The heat, the pull. I thought it was just it's begun. Seamers confirmed. Viara swayed, gripping the edge of the console. The fire was no longer hers alone. She had passed it on like a virus, like a curse. What have I done? She whispered, and before anyone could speak, Jim let out a strangled sound. His breathing quickened, pupils dilated. He turned to Viara with a look that was no longer just his own. I need you, he growled. Seamers moved quickly, reaching for the sedative. We have to sedate him, now. Viara didn't hesitate. Do it. As Seamers pressed the hypospray to Jim's neck, Viara stepped forward, her hand brushing Jim's cheek. His eyes locked onto hers, not with anger, but pleading. I'm sorry, he whispered. Then he collapsed, and Viara, trembling, dropped to her knees beside him. She touched his hair, brushed it back from his brow, and spoke the words she had feared more than any fire. I'll fix this, I swear. And for the first time since it began, she wept. Viara remained kneeling beside Jim for a long time after he fell unconscious. Her hand still rested lightly against his cheek, her thumb tracing the line of his jaw, as if touch alone could undo what she had done. He looked peaceful now, quiet, but the quiet was false. It was chemical, manufactured, behind that closed gaze. His body was a battlefield, the serum now coursing through his veins, twisting desire into a sickness he hadn't asked for. A sickness she had given him, and she could not run from that. Doctor Seamers didn't speak. Perhaps he knew silence was the only appropriate witness to what was unfolding. Perhaps he too understood the gravity of what had just happened, not just for Viara and Jim, but for the ship, the crew, the mission. Viara stood slowly. The strength in her limbs was fraying. Her bones felt brittle, as though shame had become a weight embedded in her marrow. You need to test him, she said quietly, not looking away from Jim. Monitor the spread, check the neurological markers, confirm how far it's gone. Seamers gave a solemn nod. I'll do everything I can, but Viara already knew. She had seen it in Jim's eyes before the sedative took hold, that dilation of pupils, the heated flush beneath his skin, the taut desperation vibrating from his body like static. He had felt what she had felt, and that meant she had become the vector. Have you felt it? She asked suddenly, turning to Seamers. Her voice was calm, clinical, but her third eye pulsed dimly with apprehension. Any symptoms? Seamers blinked, startled by the question. No, he said slowly, nothing yet, but I'll begin a full sweep. We'll isolate anyone you came into contact with after the reaction began. Viara shook her head. It's already too late. Seamers opened his mouth to argue, but Viara was already walking to the far corner of the medbay, to the high-security terminal. Her robe trailed behind her like a banner of surrender. She moved with the gravity of someone who had accepted the inevitable. What are you doing? Seamers asked, following. I'm issuing a temporary medical override, she said. I'm authorizing a level 3 coma induction. For myself. Seamers froze. Viara, it's the only way to contain this. You said it yourself, we don't understand the transmission vector. It could be touch, breath, proximity. I can't risk infecting the others. You're not thinking clearly. I'm thinking more clearly than I have since this started. She cut in. If I remain conscious, I become a danger to every man and woman on this ship. I become the catalyst. Seamers stared at her, disbelief painted across his features. Viara, we don't know how your body will respond to a coma in this state. The hormone levels, the neural acceleration, it's uncharted. You could suffer cognitive damage. You might not come back. Viara turned to him. Her expression was serene, but resolute, the kind of serenity one finds not in peace, but in sacrifice. Then I don't come back. Seamers looked away, jaw clenched. You don't have to do this alone. Viara smiled sadly. I've been alone since the moment the serum changed me. No one can carry this but me. He hesitated, warred with his conscience, then finally nodded. I'll prepare the compound. As he turned to gather the dosage, Viara walked back to Jim's bed. He was still asleep, breathing shallow but steady. She reached down, pressed her lips gently to his forehead. I'm sorry, she whispered. You didn't deserve this. None of you did. Then she climbed onto the adjacent bio bed. The chill of the medical slab seeped into her skin. Her body still pulsed with residual heat, but her mind had begun to settle, as though decision had cooled the chaos. As though accepting the burden had quieted the scream, Seamers returned, syringe in hand. His face was unreadable now, the mask of a physician who had learned to compartmentalize. Final confirmation, he said, tone clinical but shaking at the edges. Medically induced coma, full stasis protocol, estimated duration until a viable cure is found. Proceed, she said, but just before the needle touched her skin, she spoke again. Doctor. He paused. Yes, if you find a cure. If I don't wake in time, tell Jim. I chose this. Freely. Seamers swallowed hard. He'll know. The hiss of the injection was soft, almost tender, and then the world faded. She drifted, not through space, but through time. Not through thought, but through dream. There were no stars here, no crew, no gravity, just the rhythm of her own memories unraveling into silence. Her third eye opened and closed in the void, no longer seeking aura, but flickers of identity. She floated past childhood visions of Aurelian temples and mountain winds, past her first days in the academy, past battlefields, past laughter with humans she had learned to love. And then came the voices, distorted at first, then clearer, spreading, faster than projected, symptoms showing in secondary crew clusters. Jim, Captain Matt, she tried to move, to speak, but her body was gone. She was mind only, soul only, watching from the ether. If we don't find a solution soon, drastic measures. And then the most terrifying phrase of all, we're losing containment. Somewhere far away, her fingers twitched, her third eye flared. The fire was still with her, even in stasis. Viara woke not like someone rising from slumber, but like a diver pulled abruptly from the depths, lungs gasping, body foreign. Every inch of her skin prickled with disorientation. Her mouth was dry, her tongue heavy, and the familiar medbay lights were searing after the endless dark. For several heartbeats, she couldn't remember who she was. And then the fire whispered to her from beneath her skin, not in its full, consuming form, not like before, but as a memory, etched into muscle and marrow. Her limbs ached from disuse, her chest burned with sudden breath, and her mind struggled to rise from the mire of sedation. Viara, can you hear me? The voice brought clarity. Doctor. Seamers leaned over her, looking worse than she had ever seen him, eyes bloodshot, jaw unshaven, medical coat rumpled like he hadn't taken it off in days, weeks. She tried to speak, but her throat failed her. The word came out as a hoarse croak. How long? Seamers supported her as she struggled to sit up, pillows placed carefully behind her back. He didn't lie. 3 weeks. Her mind reeled. 3 weeks in stasis. 3 weeks in which the world had spun without her. What happened? She rasped. He hesitated just for a second. But in that pause, she felt the gravity of the answer to come. It's worse, he said. Much worse. Viara's breath caught, but she nodded for him to continue. The serum continued mutating, Seamers explained, gesturing toward his monitors, faster than we could track. It's now fully integrated into the genetic expression patterns of those infected. It doesn't just hijack the libido, it overrides restraint, lowers cognitive inhibition, and triggers an amplification of whatever dormant desire lies buried in a person's psyche. Viara stared. You mean? He nodded grimly. It's not just lust. It's compulsion. It's loss of control. Every secret longing, every suppressed craving, it surfaces and multiplies. Entire sections of the crew have changed. Viara closed her eyes. Guilt coiled like a serpent in her chest. How many? Over 60% of the crew, possibly more. She gritted her teeth, fists clenching in her lap. And Jim? Seamers looked away, but not fast enough to hide the flicker of pain. Jim is among them, he said. He held out longer than most. But once it took root, the symptoms escalated. Fast. Her heart twisted. Where is he? Isolated. Locked in a secure chamber, Seamers said. But it's barely enough. He's in constant agitation. The sedatives wear off too quickly now. His strength is enhanced, and the desire has overtaken his ability to reason. Viara pushed back the blanket. Her legs were weak, muscles atrophied. But she swung them over the edge of the bed, bracing herself against the cold floor. I need to see him. Seamers stepped forward. Viara, no, you're still recovering. The risk, he's my responsibility, she said, her voice now carrying steel. This began with me. I have to face him. I have to try. The doctor didn't argue. Perhaps he understood that this was no longer about protocol, no longer about medicine. This was about redemption, about a soldier trying to reclaim her name. She entered the holding chamber quietly. Seamers waited outside, ready with tranquilizers if needed. The air was thick, not with pheromones, but tension, as if even the walls knew that they housed something volatile. Jim was crouched on the far end of the room, his back to her. His shoulders were heaving, his skin glistened with sweat, and his shirt had long since been discarded. His breathing was ragged, not like someone resting, but like a beast caged for too long. Jim, she called softly. He froze, then slowly, he turned. The moment their eyes met, something primal rippled between them. His pupils were blown wide. His chest rose and fell in rapid bursts. And yet, beneath the haze, she saw him, the man, the captain, the friend, still there, still fighting. Viara, he whispered, and it was both a plea and a warning. I'm here, she said, stepping closer. You're not alone. He clenched his fists, shaking his head. I can't think. I can't. I'm losing myself, every second. She nodded. I know. I've been there. He dropped to his knees. I feel like I'm burning, all the time. And when I see you, I know, she repeated, kneeling before him, their eyes locked, not in lust, but in understanding. I gave this to you, she said. I infected you. I'm going to fix it. His expression softened, even as his body trembled. How? She turned to Seamers through the glass. Tell her. The doctor's voice echoed through the cum. We found something. The original serum, unmutated. A sample was stored in stasis from before the reaction occurred. I think if we inject it into Viara's system, it might trigger a reset. Her physiology could act as a kind of key recalibrating the mutated strain. Viara nodded. Then do it. Seamers hesitated. Viara, it might make the symptoms worse before they get better. I'm not afraid of the fire anymore, she said. She rose, walked to the wall where Seamers waited with the compound. The door opened with a hiss. She extended her arm. The needle slid in. The serum entered her bloodstream like a scream. Viara cried out, her body convulsing. For a moment, the inferno returned brighter than before, every nerve a lit fuse, every cell demanding release. She collapsed. Jim roared behind the glass, but then, something changed. The fire receded, not suddenly, but steadily, like an ocean tide pulled back by a new gravity. Her breath slowed, her skin cooled, and when she opened her eyes, for the first time in weeks, she felt normal. Tears welled. Doctor, she whispered, voice breaking. It worked. And Seamers, face pale with awe, whispered back, then we may have a chance after all. Relief, when it came, was like the exhale after a war cry, shuddering, hard-earned, and soaked in exhaustion. Viara lay against the medbay cot, her body trembling not from heat, but from the aftershock of salvation. The reset serum had worked. She could feel it, the gnawing hunger, the claws of compulsive need, had loosened their grip. In their place was something quieter, the pulse of a heartbeat no longer ruled by fire. And yet, Calm was not peace. As she sat up, Seamers was already at work. His hands moved with practiced urgency, drawing samples from her bloodstream, scanning, analyzing, calculating vectors and probabilities. But beneath that precision lay a trembling hope. If this holds, he said, eyes locked to the monitor, we can synthesize a counter-agent using your post-injection blood work. A compound that neutralizes the mutated strain at its source. Viara nodded, but her thoughts were elsewhere. Jim, the sound of his name, even unspoken, stirred both ache and dread. She had seen the hunger in his eyes, had felt the serum's grip on his mind, the way it turned love into compulsion and need into madness. And yet, she had also seen him fight even as the infection took hold. He had resisted. He had tried. That was the man she needed to see. She stood slowly, the floor cold beneath her bare feet, and reached for her discarded robe. Her body was still weak, but her will had returned. It gave her strength, enough to walk, enough to face the fire she had passed to someone she once believed invincible. Viara, wait, Seamers called, catching her wrist before she reached the door. His face had changed. A shadow now crossed it, something unspoken behind his tired eyes. There's something I need to tell you. Before you go to him. Her breath stilled. What is it? The doctor ran a hand through his hair, a nervous gesture she had never seen from him. While you were under, things didn't just escalate biologically. They got messy emotionally. People lost their moral boundaries, acted on things they would have never allowed to surface. She narrowed her eyes. Say it. Seamers hesitated, then took a breath. Ensign Vaylor. She acted on suppressed feelings for the captain. She was infected early, and in the midst of it, she initiated contact with him. Sexual contact. Viara stared at him. For a long time, she said nothing. Her face did not betray emotion, but her third eye flickered, a silent, spinning orb caught between revelation and restraint. They were compromised. Seamers continued, his voice low. He was not himself. Neither was she. It wasn't love, Viara. It was influence, chemistry, biology. She nodded once, slowly, but the motion was empty. Inside, her soul twisted, not out of anger, but out of mourning for a possibility she hadn't dared claim aloud. Now muddied by betrayal, even if unintentional, she turned from Seamers. Thank you for telling me. Viara, she raised a hand to stop him. Don't. He did not follow her. She walked the corridor to Jim's isolation suite like a soldier returning from exile. The path was familiar, yet every step felt foreign, as if the ship itself had changed in her absence, as if each bulkhead now bore witness to sins unspoken. When the door opened, she found him sitting at the edge of his cot, cleaned, dressed, calmer. The sedatives had worn off, but the feral edge was gone. What remained was something older, sadness, shame. His eyes lifted to her, and in them, she saw the man again. Viara, he said, like the word itself was painful. She crossed the room and sat across from him, knees nearly touching. Neither spoke. For a long time, they simply looked at each other as if trying to remember who they had been before the fire. I'm okay, she said at last. Seamers found a way to reset the serum. We're synthesizing the cure now. He nodded, eyes still shadowed. That's good. Silence again. Then she asked without accusation, did it happen? Jim's hands clenched in his lap. Yes. Viara closed her eyes, a slow exhale passing her lips. But it wasn't. It wasn't real, he added. I was losing myself, every minute. When Vaylor came to me, I couldn't think straight. I didn't know what I was doing. She opened her eyes. But some part of you did? He flinched, but didn't deny it. Viara rose, pacing slowly. I know the serum lowered inhibitions. I know it hijacked desire. But it didn't create something from nothing. It only amplified what was buried. I didn't want her, Jim said quickly. Not the way I want you. What I felt with her, it was heat, chemical. But you, I know. She interrupted softly. I know. She stopped in front of him, looking down at the man who had once been her anchor. I'm not angry, she said. I'm grieved, not by what happened, but by the fact that we were forced to see each other at our most primal, before we had the chance to choose each other fully. I wanted us to be something deliberate, something earned. Jim's voice cracked. I still want that. Her third eye glowed gently. So do I. She reached out and took his hand. He didn't speak, only held on tightly, as if to say, then let me start again. And in that quiet understanding, something fragile yet strong began to rebuild. In the hours that followed, the ship held its breath. Seamers and his team worked tirelessly in the medical lab, extracting the new compound from Viara's blood, refining it, replicating it. Drones distributed doses across the vessel, one deck at a time. Crew members were summoned in controlled shifts, injected under supervision, and quarantined for observation. The once infected, hollow-eyed, shamed, exhausted began to return to themselves. Memories flickered back in pieces. Some cried. Others broke into laughter that trembled too close to hysteria. Some said nothing at all. For those who remembered what they had done or what had been done to them, the weight of memory was heavier than any virus. And through it all, Viara and Jim sat side by side in a quiet alcove of the medbay, saying little, sharing warmth. It was not love in its purest form. Not yet, but it was something real, a moment untouched by manipulation. Their hands remained intertwined, not out of compulsion, but out of choice. Do you remember everything? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Jim nodded. Every second? Viara's third eye flickered, watching the slight tremor in his hand. Even what you felt for Vaylor? He nodded again, slower this time. Viara swallowed hard. Do you still feel it? A long pause followed. Jim's eyes didn't waver. No, he said at last. I felt her in the way a starving man feels. Warmth, but warmth isn't sustenance. It doesn't feed you. It only reminds you that you're empty. Viara let out a breath she didn't realize she'd been holding. I hated knowing, she admitted. Not because I doubted your honor, but because it reminded me that we are more fragile than we pretend. Jim looked down at their joined hands. You're not fragile, Viara. You're the strongest person I've ever met. She shook her head, smiling without humor. No, I just know how to wear armor well. He chuckled, low and tired. Then, maybe we both do. They sat in silence again, two warriors without weapons, two souls stripped of pretense. Around them, the world was recovering, but inside, the rebuilding had only just begun. Would you do it again? She asked softly. He blinked. What? Everything. The night in my quarters, the surrender, the desire. Jim's voice was steady. Yes, but only if you wanted it to. I did, she said, even before the fire, especially then. And now, she turned to face him fully. The medbay light cast a soft glow across her features, illuminating the faint shimmer of her skin, the delicate pulse of her third eye. Now, I want to learn who you are when neither of us is burning. He leaned forward, pressing his forehead gently to hers. Their breath mingled, but this time, there was no urgency, no serum, no instinct clawing for release, only presence. I want that too, he said. A beginning, not a reaction. She closed her eyes. Then we begin. The following days were filled with strange echoes. Crew members passed each other in the halls with awkward nods and forced smiles. Some looked away entirely. Others clung to old hierarchies as if they could forget the moments when they'd been stripped of them. It was not easy. Lieutenant Coral had to apologize to Ensign Lang for pinning him against the wall in the ship's botanical wing. Chief Engineer Vass tried to joke away the incident in the engine bay with two junior mechanics, but they didn't laugh. And Vaylor disappeared into her lab, buried beneath data logs, speaking to no one. Viara tried not to think of her, but of course, she did. Vaylor had always been a mystery. Quiet, observant, stoic even by Vulcan standards. But now Viara understood. The silence had not been absence. It had been control. Until the serum had stolen that control and bared something hidden. She didn't blame her. Not truly. They had all been victims. And yet, it hurt. On the third day of recovery, Viara approached Vaylor in the science wing. The Vulcan stiffened, hands pausing mid-command on the holo console. Lieutenant, Vaylor said evenly. Viara nodded. I'm not here for confrontation. Vaylor turned. Her dark eyes met Viara's, calm but not cold. Then why are you here? Viara considered her answer carefully. To tell you I understand, and that I forgive you. Vaylor blinked. Forgive me? You acted under influence, Viara said. But influence does not negate consequence. I don't hold anger, Vaylor, but I need you to know that it still changed something. Not because of what happened, but because it revealed what we hide. A long silence passed. Then Vaylor spoke, voice lower than before. I admired him, from a distance, always with control. I never intended. I never thought I would be capable of. I know. Viara interrupted gently. So did I. Vaylor looked down. Then perhaps we are not so different. Viara gave a thin smile. Perhaps not, but we'll both need time. Valor nodded once. Understood. It was not a resolution, but it was enough. Later that night, Jim found Viara in the observatory, a small room at the top of the ship's dorsal tower, where the stars stretched in infinite silence across the void. She stood there, watching them. I keep thinking, she said as he stepped beside her, about how close we came, how easily everything could have been lost. Jim folded his arms. We didn't lose everything. No, she agreed. But we lost illusions, and that might be more important. He watched her face in the starlight, the subtle shimmer of her features, the quiet weight behind her eyes. Do you still feel it? He asked. The fire? He nodded. Viara was silent for a moment. Then she shook her head. No, it's gone. He exhaled. Good. But the memory of it isn't, she added. Jim turned to her. Is that a bad thing? She smiled faintly. I don't know yet. Ask me after our first real kiss. He raised an eyebrow. That wasn't real? She turned to him fully. No, it was chemical. Needed. Beautiful. Yes, but not chosen. And with that, she leaned in and kissed him. Not because she had to, but because she wanted to. The serum's fire had been vanquished, but its shadows remained in the days that followed the inoculation campaign. The Starship Endeavour slowly stirred back to life like a wounded creature learning to breathe again. Lights blinked with steadier rhythm. Orders resumed in hushed tones. Crew rosters were reinstated. Shift rotations recalibrated. But the silence that settled over the vessel was not peace. It was memory. The crew had seen each other and done, stripped of uniforms, of structure, of restraint. In that time, they had crossed boundaries not with malice, but without choice. And now, they were left with the consequences. Viara watched it unfold from the bridge. A junior ensign paused when passing her superior officer, unsure whether to salute or avert her gaze. Two medical technicians worked side by side in tense quiet, hands moving with professional precision, while their eyes refused to meet. Laughter was scarce. Conversations were short. Apologies, when offered, came wrapped in embarrassment. They had survived the affliction, but they had not yet survived the aftermath. Viara understood. Better than anyone. She carried no shame for what her body had done. The serum had made monsters of biology, but she did carry the burden of being its origin. Every sideways glance, every whispered conversation that paused when she entered a room, she felt it. The alien, the infected, the cause. And yet, she did not shrink. She stood with her spine straight and her gaze steady. She took her shifts on the bridge with silent dignity. She walked the corridors without flinching, not because she felt above reproach, but because someone had to model how to move forward. That someone was her. Jim stood beside her, not as a protector, but as a partner. Their relationship, if it could yet be called that, was not born of heat anymore. It was not urgent or impulsive. It had become something quieter, slower, richer. In the mess hall, they ate together in calm conversation. On the command deck, they exchanged nods laced with unspoken understanding. In the privacy of his quarters, or hers, they held each other in silence, breathing in sync, relearning what it meant to simply be. There were no promises yet, but there was presence. One evening, as they reviewed sensor data, Jim broke the quiet. You know, he said, we never really had a beginning. Viara looked up from her datapad. We had a crisis. He nodded. That's not the same. No, she said softly. It's not. He set the pad aside, leaned forward on the table. I don't want us to be a story of reaction. I want to be chosen, every day. Viara studied him. You want to date me, she said flatly. A smile tugged at his lips. Is that what humans call it? She returned the smile. Then yes, let's begin properly. And so they did. They began to talk, really talk, not about strategy or duty or survival, but about who they had been before the serum, before the war, before the ship. Viara shared stories of her mother's devotion to ancient Aurelian songcraft, how her people sang the stars into their bones. Jim confessed to his childhood fear of silence, and how becoming captain had been his way of mastering it. They spoke of loneliness, the quiet ache of command, the alienation of being different. They spoke of the moment they each first saw the other, not as crew, but as kindred, and through those conversations, the fire that had once consumed them transformed into something else entirely. Warmth, not blazing, but enduring. The rest of the Crew began to heal in their own time. The science officers developed a counseling protocol informed by both human and Vulcan techniques. Engineers repaired a systems panel that had been ripped apart during one of the earlier episodes. The ship psychologist herself, a survivor of the serum's influence, held group circles in the cargo bay where crew members could speak freely, anonymously if needed. There were tears, regrets, confessions, but there was also laughter. Hesitant at first, then genuine. Life aboard the Endeavour began to hum again, not with the rhythm it had before, but with a new cadence. A rhythm born of resilience. One night, as they stood beneath the vast canopy of stars in the observation deck, Viara looked to Jim and said, "I used to think strength was about control, about suppression, about never letting anyone see your weakness. And now?" he asked. "Now I think true strength is knowing when to surrender, when to be seen, when to say, 'This is who I am, even if I break.'" Jim wrapped an arm around her shoulders. "Then we broke beautifully." She laughed softly, resting her head against his shoulder. "Yes," she said, "we did." The Endeavour sailed on, outward through the black tapestry of space, her engines thrumming in steady rhythm, her hull scarred but strong, a testament to everything her crew had endured. Outside, the galaxy spun indifferent. Stars were born and consumed in silence. Planets drifted in perfect loneliness. But within the ship, something had changed. Not just systems repaired or ranks reinstated. Something deeper, a shift in spirit they had not merely recovered from. The serum they had transformed. What had begun as contamination, as crisis, had become revelation. Each crew member had faced their own reflection. Magnified, raw, untamed. Desires unspoken had been brought to light. The fragility of control exposed. And yet, none of it had destroyed them. It had revealed them. And now, in the gentle current of routine, they moved forward, not as people trying to forget, but as people choosing to remember and grow. For Viara and Jim, that growth had become something sacred. Their bond was no longer defined by emergency or fire. It was now forged in the quieter crucible of choice. They spent mornings in shared silence, sipping bitter Aurelian tea and smiling over datapads. They sparred together in the gymnasium, teasing each other between strikes. They argued about protocols, about mission details, not out of friction, but because they had come to trust in each other's minds, not just their bodies. One evening, as the Endeavour passed the edge of an uncharted nebula, Jim joined Viara at the viewing pane, where streaks of purple clouds danced like liquid poetry. "Beautiful," he murmured. She didn't respond right away. Instead, she reached for his hand and held it, not possessively, not urgently, but in solidarity. "It reminds me of the paintings my mother used to make," Viara said at last. She'd blend crystal dust into the pigments. The canvases would shimmer in the dark. Jim smiled. "That's what you do." She turned to him. "Shimmer?" He shook his head. "Bring beauty to the dark." Her breath caught slightly, a hitch only someone who truly knew her would notice. "I'm not always beautiful," she said softly. "I've seen you broken," he replied. "And I still think you are." They fell into silence again. But this time, it was not a silence of pain. It was reverence. In the coming weeks, the crew settled into a rhythm that was more than routine. It was rebirth. Training drills resumed with renewed discipline. The medbay hosted not crises but laughter, and occasional grumbles about flu shots. The science division submitted 2 papers for interstellar publication. Life, strange and miraculous, carried on, and through it all, the crew looked at one another differently now. With deeper understanding, with grace. They had seen each other, without masks, and had chosen to stay. That was a kind of love too. Viara and Jim stood together as the Endeavour prepared to approach its next destination. A terraforming colony in the Mid-Rim cluster. A simple mission, straightforward, predictable. But as they stared at the glowing planet ahead, Jim turned to her and said, "You ever wonder what would have happened if the serum hadn't changed you?" She thought for a moment. "You mean, if none of it had happened?" He nodded. "Would we still be here?" Viara smiled, slow and sure. "No, we'd still be circling each other. Too afraid, too formal, 2 people behind walls. And now?" he asked. She took his hand again. "Now we're 2 people who burned the walls down," he grinned, "and built something better with the ashes." She leaned her head against his shoulder. "I don't know what tomorrow holds," she whispered, "but I know I'll face it with you." He squeezed her hand. "Always." As the Endeavour glided toward its next mission, her crew stood ready not just as professionals or explorers, but as people who had faced the most dangerous frontier of all, the one within themselves, and emerged not perfect, but real, together. They had weathered fire, together, they had chosen love, and together, they would chart a course through the stars, not as who they once were, but as who they had become, unbreakable, unashamed, unstoppable.